What if events went differently in the Batman Arkham video games? Imagine if another character had been involved within the Batman Arkham trilogy. Imagine if Wolverine was in the Arkhamverse. Imagine if the X-Men's greatest asset, the Wolverine, was in these video games. Now, it would make for an interesting storyline, and you guys voted for this on Multiverse Monday, where this got a landslide victory. So I do want to say congratulations, my fellow watchers of the Multiverse, for going out there and going to vote and voting for this particular series to happen on the channel, because I do want to say that your voice does matter. The community matters to me, and I do want to say thank you guys so very much for wanting to make this happen, because we really enjoyed making this happen and I can't wait to dive into it. But that being said, my fellow watchers of the Multiverse, I do have breaking news. There is a second YouTube channel brewing that is in the works right now. And I did announce this the other day, and I did talk about it. It is a part of the dark. So it is a dark corner of the MissedThePart channel where we kind of dive deep into custom storylines, fiction storylines. There's going to be a lot of horror and psychological horror, thriller, and so many more one-off fanfiction scenarios, except these are kind of going to be more original. So actually, I wouldn't really say it's a fan fiction. I think it would just be more so just fiction and kind of like my own ideas. And so that's gonna be a channel that I'm gonna kind of do, you know, when I have the time to do it. So you can expect the first couple of videos to be coming out very soon. So I do want to say, do make sure to subscribe, like, share, and turn those notifications on so you and your friends are always up to date whenever I post a brand new video. But that being said, let's dive into the brand new What If episode. Good old Gotham City. Constant criminal activity. A man who dresses in a bat costume fighting against psycho clowns. A plant lady. And assassins on the daily. And who can forget about our favorite hot-headed X-Man with his slash now ask questions later attitude? Wait, is he in the right universe? Location: Gotham City, New Jersey. Arkham Asylum. Time: 10:22 p.m. Sipping on his cup of coffee, James Howlett continued to read the newspaper he had borrowed from one of the other guards in the asylum. It was the same news as it always was. Robberies, arson, murders. Nothing new when it comes to Gotham, but at least the comics and the papers were always funny. Suddenly, another security guard named David approaches James and tells him to grab his weapon immediately. The man was instantly on high alert, and he asked what was going on while picking up the assault rifle that was hidden under the counter he was sitting behind. David needed to only say 2 words, and James understood how serious the situation was. The Joker. James groaned and stood from his seat to follow his comrade to the holding cells, where the clown prince of crime would surely be locked up until his upcoming trial. James scoffed at the thought of Joker being put on trial when it was more than likely that the psycho was involved in whatever recent crime he was being brought to the asylum for. The 2 guards quickly made their way through the intensive care center, and they passed various inmates within Arkham, such as Killer Croc, who was shackled by multiple heavy chains. Considering how the mutated man will bite off the head of anyone who had the misfortune of standing in his way, the chains were indeed necessary. As James walked by the patient, Croc scowled at the guard and let out a low growl, but he had not expected for James to snarl back at him, and apparently, neither did the other security guards as they looked at James with looks of confusion and a hint of fear. Did James think he was some kind of animal or something? David, however, was used to his friend's unusual behavior, and he often found it amusing. But he did warn James to calm down before he was placed in a cell like Croc. James ignored his comrade's advice, as he could care less what others thought of him. That was just the kind of man he was. Walking through another pair of metal doors, James and David finally reached the entrance to the holding cells, where Commissioner James Gordon, who is mostly referred to as Jim, was arguing with another guard about something, and James was sure that something was the person standing by the commissioner's side right now, the one known as Batman. Everyone in Gotham knew of the Caped Crusader, and he was admired by superheroes from all around the world. Even James held a bit of respect for Batman, because even though he was just a human, the vigilante was a man making a difference. The same could not be said for all the people here in Gotham City. Beside James, David was excitedly whispering about seeing Batman in person for the very first time. He was a Batman fanatic, and David was hoping to run into the Caped Crusader at some point when he started his job as a security guard here in Arkham Asylum. Looking out the glass window behind the guard who was arguing with Gordon, James could see someone being dragged in handcuffs by another security guard towards the cells. With the tacky suit and bright green hair, it was obvious who it was being taken away. They had not even reached the exit when the Joker suddenly fell to his knees, like he tripped on something. But the guard holding onto the criminal was not having any of it, and he demanded for Joker to get up from the floor. But that was when things went terribly wrong. With a smirk, Joker headbutted the security guard, and then the clown wrapped the chain that connected his handcuffs around the guard's neck. Batman immediately jumped into action and shouted for Gordon to alert the warden of Joker escaping capture. And seeing as the doors to the area where Joker was currently in are locked, Batman needed to find another way in. Pulling back his fist, the Caped Crusader was preparing to punch the window in order to break it so he could get inside. However, a roar from behind stopped Batman, and he turned just in time to watch James pounce through the window and land roughly on the other side, shards of glass falling along with him. Ignoring the sudden reaction of James, Batman joined the security guard, and the two could only watch as Joker escaped through the exit after the electric barrier was taken down by an unknown ally of his. But the Caped Crusader was sure he knew the person who was helping the Joker. And speaking of helping the clown, the other cells that surrounded James and Batman were also opened, and multiple inmates slowly approached their prey with sinister smiles crossing their faces. Batman suggested for James to stand back while he dealt with the criminals, but the guard was not about to stand back while the vigilante had all the fun. James wasted no time as he immediately charged at one of the inmates and punched them square in his face. The inmate flew back into one of the now empty cells, and he slid across the floor until his back hit the wall. They fell unconscious before even falling onto the ground. Well, good to know that there were security guards here that were somewhat competent, Batman thought. Seriously, even with all their training and weaponry, Arkham's staff made it so easy for inmates to escape. But now was not the time to think about that. Right now, Batman and James had some criminals to take care of. Location: secure treatment. Transfer room: Arkham Asylum. Time: 10:56 p.m. Following the green arrows that were poorly painted onto the walls, Batman and James eventually made it to the transfer room, where they finally reached the Joker. The clown did not seem too surprised about Batman finding him, but he was a little shocked to see one of the guards accompanying his arch nemesis. The security guard actually looked like he could put up a fight, but Joker was not too worried about him. She didn't... After all, James probably was not going to live for much longer. The Joker was casually walking on top of a large crate that was hanging from a huge chain. The clown's focus remained solely on Batman, and he asked the vigilante what took him so long to get here. Without saying a word, Batman withdrew a batarang from his utility belt and threw it towards Joker, who simply ducked to avoid the projectile. As he laughed at the poor attempt to strike him down, Batman loudly declared that the Joker would not escape the asylum, but the clown said he was counting it, just not right now. With a hard stomp on the crate, the wheel on the door turned furiously, and soon the door flew open to reveal the abomination that was hidden behind it. A large hand emerged from the dark abyss within the cage and gripped the door frame as a hulking body became visible as well. Batman and James's eyes widened when they saw the creature, their body grotesque and massive. Their glowing green eyes narrowed at its prey, which unfortunately was Batman and James. Batman pulled out another batarang and tossed it at the mutated inmate. The projectile successfully landed on its target, and as a bonus, the batarang exploded the moment it made contact with the monster. He stumbled back, temporarily stunned by the explosion, but the creature quickly regained his composure and charged at Batman with a roar. But before the mutate could even touch Batman, James jumped into the fray and rammed his whole body into the inmate, shoving the enemy away. Seeing James's ferocity and strength for a second time, Batman wondered who exactly this security guard was. He had no problem diving headfirst into danger, but that was a good quality for someone working here in Arkham. Even so, Batman had a feeling that James was used to trouble, or rather trouble followed James wherever he went. Could the guard be excited about the battle taking place below him? Joker jumped up and down, and his maniacal laughter echoed throughout the room. He was not expecting for the guard to initiate a fist fight with his latest creation, but it was quite entertaining to say the least. The mutated inmate aimed another punch at James, and the security guard jumped back to avoid the attack. James quickly made a counterattack by uppercutting his enemy, whose head snapped back due to the force of the strike. The criminal's entire body soon followed, and they fell to the ground on their back. With his opponent down, James's attention was now on the Joker, but he had no time to catch the clown, as the crate he was standing on began to be pulled back. A body flew past James, and he turned around to see Batman taking care of a few inmates that had appeared while the guard was preoccupied with the mutate. The caped crusader did not even break a sweat against the criminals, but unfortunately, it bought Joker enough time to flee again. Joker's laughter was the last thing they heard, as he disappeared behind a set of large, heavy doors, each closing one after the other. Location: unknown chamber. Arkham Asylum. Time: 11:43 p.m. After rescuing Gordon from the annoying Harley Quinn, who was revealed to be the one helping Joker take over Arkham, the Commissioner, along with Batman and James, headed down to the level below them. The Joker said there was a surprise waiting for them, and while the three men were sure it was a trap, they did not have much of a choice but to go forward. Stepping into a mysterious chamber, the entire room was covered in a thick fog. The trio could barely see anything, but Jim spotted a computer to his left, with multiple screens attached above it. The Commissioner tried to log into the computer, but it required a certain doctor's password. Batman quickly told Gordon to forget about the computer and to get behind him and James. Before them, suspended in the air by various pipes and cords, was one of the Vigilante's most deadly foes, Bane. Batman whispered the name as he looked upon the masked criminal, and James mumbled something about being told that Bane had escaped Blackgate a while back. So what was he doing here? His voice strained, Bane managed to speak to the three men and pleaded with them to cut him down. Batman had to inquire as to who had done something so inhumane to the criminal, and Bane was quick to answer the question. It was Dr. Young. Penelope Young. James recalled that she was one of the doctors they had rescued in the medical facility, and for some reason, Joker's henchmen had shown particular interest in Young. This must be why. They must be using the venom in Bane's blood to mutate the prisoners into monsters. Just then, one of the screens above the computer flickered for a moment, before live footage of the Joker began to play. He informed Batman, James, and Gordon that the Doctor would not be alive for much longer. The clown then asked the three heroes if they liked his puppets, and if he should cut Bane down before holding up a small remote controller. On the top of it was a red button, and with a chuckle, the Joker pressed the button. A siren blared within the room. Batman, James, and Gordon were standing in, and the room was illuminated by bright red lights. Not only that, but Bane's body started to convulse violently, and a massive amount of venom was being pushed through the pipes attached to the criminal directly into his body. His muscles grew substantially, and his eyes glowed a familiar green, the same kind as the mutated inmates. Becoming too heavy for the pipes to hold anymore, Bane fell to the floor, and red smoke suddenly filled the room, cloaking the inmate from view. Batman immediately pushed Jim out of harm's way, just as Bane came charging out of the smoke, and he swung his huge arm at the two men, who swiftly dodged the clumsy attack. James then decided to throw a punch at Bane's face, but the strike did not do any damage. Seeing how his move was ineffective, the security guard mumbled, "Oh crap," just before Bane grabbed him and threw him through a brick wall. James crashed onto the ground in a new room, which he recognized as the boiler room. Following after his comrade, Batman rushed to James's side and asked if the guard was all right. After all, Bane had tossed him through a brick wall. But James waved his hand and claimed he was fine while cracking his neck. But instead of focusing on his well-being, James suggested that they focus on Bane, who was slowly stepping through the wall into the boiler room. It was not going to be easy to stop him, but James was not about to back down. The security guard moved to attack Bane again, but Batman stopped him. The caped crusaders said they could incapacitate Bane if they cut off his venom supply, and by that, they needed to sever the pumps in the inmate's back. James smirked at the mention of cutting, and he proudly proclaimed that cutting was his specialty. Batman was about to ask what the guard meant, but as if to answer the question that had yet to leave his mouth, James held up his fists and something incredibly unexpected happened. With a loud snicked, metal claws suddenly emerged from James's knuckles, 3 on each hand. The guard's smile widened, excited about the incoming fight, and gestured with his finger for Bane to come and get him. Location: Arkham Mansion, Arkham Asylum. Time: 12:22 a.m. Returning to the mansion, Batman and James were able to find Dr. Young again, and they confronted her about the Titan formula she had created, which was a chemical solution similar to Bane's venom, but much more powerful. Young admitted she had been working with the clown, but not intentionally. She explained Joker was using an alias, Jack White, and he gladly provided the funding for Project Titan. But Young had believed Titan was going to be used to help weaker patients survive difficult treatments. In a way, the doctor simply wanted to make things right. Batman and James wanted to ask what Young meant by her last statement, but they decided it was not important right now. The Doctor then reveals that the Joker has gotten his hands on the Titan formula, but she had a feeling she knew where the clown was going. She started talking about a laboratory in the botanical gardens, but security codes were needed to get in. Walking to a safe that belonged to Warden Quincy Sharp, Young opened the container but gasped in horror when she saw that the safe had been rigged with explosives. The Joker had gotten here first, it seems. James instantly jumped into action, and just before the explosives went off, the guard jumped in front of Young and shielded her from the blast. The impact from the blast caused the two to be thrown across the office, and Batman was also swept off his feet from the sudden explosion. He collided with a nearby wall and groaned as he fell to the floor on his stomach. It was fortunate that his suit absorbed most of the blast, so he was terribly injured, and the vigilante stood up almost immediately. Thinking about James and Dr. Young, Batman was about to check on the two since they were so close to the explosion. But he stopped when a group of Joker's henchmen entered the room, and as they raised their guns, Batman tossed a smoke bomb onto the ground. The room quickly filled with dark smoke, and this caused the inmates to start coughing. While they were distracted by the smoke, Batman swooped in and knocked each of the criminals out, while they desperately attempted to shoot the caped crusader. It was futile. Batman took a breather while the smoke cleared from the office, but then something cold pressed against the back of his neck. A gun. Laughing, Harley excitedly exclaimed how she was finally going to put the Bat in his grave. There was no way the vigilante could survive a bullet at such a short range, right? But Quinn did not have the chance to pull the trigger when her weapon was suddenly sliced into pieces. Harley looked down at the pieces of her gun, now lying on the floor, and then up at the one responsible for her precious weapon being destroyed. James let out a low growl at the woman, his back smoking as a result of the explosion, and most of his shirt had been turned into rags that were holding on by threads. Harley stumbled back as James slowly approached her, his eyes filled with rage, and he was brandishing his claws before the woman to intimidate her more. Then, quietly, the security guard gave Harley a simple command: run. Location: Killer Croc's lair, Arkham Asylum. Time: 12:36 a.m. The sound of rushing water was the only thing that could be heard as Batman and James treaded quietly through the sewers. After entering the botanical gardens a while ago, the duo encountered Poison Ivy, and with some persuasion, they were able to convince the woman to help them. Ivy informed the two men that the only way they could create an antidote for Titan was to collect rare spores that are found in the sewers. And that was why Batman and James had come to the sewers in the first place. But there was one major obstacle the two were worried about: Killer Croc. This was his domain, and the duo were sure Croc was not going to let them go their merry way. And speaking of the devil, Batman and James felt the boards they were standing shift slightly, and they both knew what that meant. Croc was close, very close. Suddenly, something leapt out of the water, but the two men were ready. Batman had a batarang in hand, and he waited for the perfect moment to toss it at his target, which was an angry Killer Croc. The mutated man charged straight at Batman and James, and when he was close enough, the vigilante threw his batarang. The small projectile struck the shock collar that was around Croc's neck, and currents of electricity immediately stunned the criminal's body. Paralyzed, Croc fell back into the water, and Batman and James were given a moment of reprieve. This was going to be a hassle. Location: Botanical Gardens, Arkham Asylum. Time: 1:01 a.m. Returning to the gardens, Batman spotted a cluster of vines that had been infected with Titan. He and James thought this would be the perfect time to test out the antidote to make sure it did what it was designed to do. The vigilante took a small gun from his utility belt, which contained the antidote, and was preparing to shoot the cure directly into the vines. But another vine darted out from nowhere and knocked the gun out of Batman's hand. James growled and called out his claws as Poison Ivy came into view, saying that she could not allow the men to use the antidote. The woman added that she had been a fool and now understood that Titan was not hurting her plants, but making them stronger. With that, larger vines emerged from the ground and wrapped themselves around Ivy, lifting her up in the air as they did so. Then, from behind the woman, a giant monster plant appeared and opened its drooling mouth to let out an ear-piercing screech. Fine then, James thought. If it was a fight Ivy wanted, the guard would give it to her. Besides, he was looking to do a bit of trimming in the gardens for a while. This will be a good start. Location: Visitor Center, Rooftop, Arkham Asylum. Time: 1:45 a.m. James grunted as his enemy's claws pierced into his sides. He nor Batman had expected for the Joker to inject Titan into himself, but that was exactly what the clown had done. And now, he was a monster just like those he had mutated before, but somehow he was able to retain his mind. Joker tossed both James and Batman into the makeshift arena he created on the roof, and the guard let out a sigh of relief when his wounds instantly healed on their own. He thought it would be longer, but James was grateful that his healing factor worked quickly and efficiently. Batman stood from the floor and quickly helped James to his feet. The two then turned to Joker, who had jumped onto a high platform to pose for the news choppers that were hovering above him. While he was distracted, Batman took out his Batclaw and aimed the weapon at the mutated clown. He then shot the clawed Joker and it clung onto the clown's back. With James's help, the duo managed to pull the Joker down from the platform he was standing on, and he crashed into the boarded floor below. The clown fell right into a large electrical circuit, and he was electrocuted mercilessly. But despite being harshly shocked, Joker climbed back up to the arena and claimed that he could take anything Batman and James threw at him. But what the clown did not know was that Batman had sprayed explosive gel onto his knuckles and stated that he would not let Joker win. The caped crusader sprinted to Joker with his fist drawn back, and with all his strength, Batman delivered a powerful punch to his opponent's face. He then detonated the gel and the Joker was sent flying back, falling unconscious the moment he touched the floor. Location: outside of the Visitor Center, Arkham Asylum. Time: 2:16 a.m. Commissioner Gordon had informed Batman and James that the effects of Titan were beginning to wear off from Joker and his henchmen. He also commented on how it was a shame that Batman's car had been wrecked during this terrible ordeal. And Gordon asked if the vigilante wanted a ride. Batman politely declined the offer and said that another car was on the way. Of course, the caped crusader had backup Batmobiles. Gordon understood and turned to James, asking if the security guard was all right. James said that he was, and he was going to have to leave soon to help with the damage Joker and the other inmates had caused. He was still a security guard after all. As he turned to leave, Batman grabbed his shoulder and thanked James for his help. The vigilante would find some way to repay James for his aid, but the guard just smiled and said gratitude was not necessary. James only asked that Batman not tell anyone about his gifts. Walking away, James was greeted by his friend David, who became worried when his comrade disappeared with Batman. He also noticed that James's shirt was practically gone, and David wanted to know everything that happened. James shrugged and said nothing really exciting had occurred. David chuckled, knowing otherwise, but he was just glad to see his friend was all right. Of course, nothing could stop the great Wolverine. James playfully shoved David, hating the nickname his comrade had given him shortly after joining Arkham's staff because of his short and hairy stature. But then again, it would make a cool name About a year after the events at Arkham Asylum, James Howlett lost his job as a security guard at Arkham Asylum shortly after Quincy Sharp became mayor of Gotham City. Now, Arkham City, an open-air prison of Sharp's design, is the new facility where Gotham's criminals will be held. James knows something is wrong with Arkham City, but Wolverine will be the one to get to the bottom of it, along with the world's greatest detective. Location: outside. Arkham City, Gotham City, New Jersey. Time: 7:54 p.m. Standing by a small apartment window, James could hear shouting in the distance. He was aware of the protest going on near Arkham City, but he wanted nothing to do with it. Arkham had already taken enough time from James's life. Sighing, the man turned from the window and walked over to his worn, black couch. James dropped onto the sofa and grabbed the remote that was sitting on one of the cushions. Maybe there was something good on television tonight, James thought. The man pressed a button on his remote, and the television turned on, a cartoon currently playing on the screen. Groaning, James clicked the button again, and another channel was presented to him, which showed a woman accusing her husband of cheating on her. Some boring drama in James's mind. Again, he pressed the button and the show was changed. This time, however, the man did not immediately switch the channel. On the screen was a live viewing of the Arkham City protest, with reporter Vicky Vale narrating what was happening. Of course, she briefly spoke about the controversy behind Arkham City, which was a super prison built in the middle of Gotham City. The reporter added that Playboy millionaire Bruce Wayne would soon make an appearance to talk about his sudden interest in Gotham politics. James scoffed at the mention of the Wayne brat. If only he knew that Bruce's Playboy persona was just a front. Stepping past the reporter, Mr. Wayne confidently made his way towards the stage, casually correcting Vicky as he did so. He was a billionaire, not a millionaire. They were so last year. A mob of reporters surrounded the stage Bruce was now standing upon, and the flashes of light from cameras was almost blinding, as everyone wanted a shot of the CEO of Wayne Enterprises. Wayne gripped the edges of the podium before him, and when he finally started to speak, the man wasted no time beating around the bush. He immediately addressed how the inmates from Arkham Asylum and Blackgate Prison had been relocated to Arkham City, and a war was raging behind the prison's walls. How can this be safe for the people of Gotham? Bruce Wayne asked this to his audience, but he did not receive a reply. The question was rhetorical, of course, so he did not expect one. Continuing, Bruce stated that Arkham City needed to be shut down because it was getting out of control. He then added how starting today, the CEO would start a campaign to close Arkham City and make Gotham City a safe haven once more. That will be difficult considering that Gotham was not that safe to begin with, but getting rid of Arkham was a step in the right direction. And just as those words left his lips, armed men rushed through the crowd and confronted Wayne. This sudden event caused James to lower his remote back on the couch, and he leaned forward in his seat. There was a logo on the back of the vest the armed men were wearing, but James did not recognize it. Two of those men stood on either side of Bruce, each with their weapons aimed straight at their target's face. Without warning, the armed man to Bruce's right stomped up to him and struck the back of the billionaire's head with the back of his gun. Mr. Wayne's body fell to the floor in a crumpled heap as he was knocked unconscious. James stood from his couch and stared in disbelief at the television screen. He hated Bruce Wayne, but the CEO being attacked like that was absolutely unnecessary. In fact, who were those mysterious men? Mercenaries? Did they work for Sharp? Just then, the sound of banging on his door caused James to spin around, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. Who could possibly be paying him a visit at this hour? As if to answer his question, James heard someone on the other side of the door shouting his full name and stating that the man was under arrest. For what exactly? James did not commit any crimes, unless they are talking about the drunk guy he beat up, but that was self-defense. The drunken man hit him first. No, it could not be that. But then what else did James do? The man did not even have time to think about the topic further before his apartment door was kicked open and 5 men armed with assault rifles stormed into the living room. They surrounded James and they ordered for the man to place his hands on the back of his head. James groaned, more annoyed than anything, and did as the armed men asked. He will comply, for now. Location: Arkham City. Prison cell. Time: 9:02 p.m. Well, this certainly was not how James imagined his night would go. For him to be brought straight to Arkham City was a surprise. He did not belong here. Why was he here? For a while, James just sat quietly in his cell, hands cuffed behind the chair he was sitting on. Of course, he could have easily broken out of the handcuffs, but James wanted answers. And in order to get those answers, the man needed to stay put until someone decided to sit and talk to him. Fortunately, it did not take long for that someone to enter his cell, and it was Arkham City's own warden. Sitting on a chair placed directly across from James, Professor Hugo Strange greeted the prisoner and looked down at the clipboard in his hands. Strange adjusted his glasses and then ran a finger down the paper that was attached to his clipboard. When he was done, the professor commented on how James has a history of violent behavior, even while he was working at Arkham Asylum. James scoffed and said those reports were greatly exaggerated. Hugo raised an eyebrow and asked if the former security guard breaking one of the inmates' arms was also exaggerated. No comment, James replied. The professor did not say anything else about the subject, and instead asked why James seemed so angry all the time. His prisoner claimed he was not angry, just tired. Tired of what? Hugo inquired. Tired of humanity? James stiffened in his chair, and that did not go unnoticed by the professor. Smirking, Strange leaned forward in his seat and whispered to James, "I know what you are." James turned away from the professor and said he had no idea what Hugo was talking about. Hugo chuckled and said that James did not need to play dumb with him. The professor has only met a few mutants in his life, such as Killer Croc, who was born with a genetic disease that resulted in him gaining super strength and a reptilian appearance. But seeing as James looked like any other human, at least on the outside, it was easy for him to blend in. What would it take, Hugo wondered, as he reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out something small and shiny, as well as sharp. It was a pocket knife. The professor stood from his seat and walked over to James, standing behind his prisoner's chair. He then placed the end of his knife against James's neck and bent down to whisper in the other man's ear. Strange said he could not wait to cut the mutant open and see what made him tick. James let out a low growl, and his body practically shook with rage. Who does this professor think he is? The urge to unleash his metal claws overwhelmed James, and the next thing he knew, his vision was consumed by the color red. Location: Arkham City, the steel mill. Time: 10:05 p.m. Finally, James managed to get away from the guards, as well as a few rogue inmates that also happened to have a grudge against him. It must be due to his work as a security guard at Arkham Asylum, and the criminals here recognized James from those days. Oh well. It was not James's fault that they decided to go down paths of crime. He was only doing his job and protecting the innocent citizens of Gotham. But anyway, James thought it would be a good idea to find a vantage point, so he could get an idea of the layout of Arkham City. He was aware that a portion of Gotham City had been closed off to create Arkham, but the mutant was not sure how much things have changed since then, with criminals basically roaming free in the city. The mutant wondered if Arkham's inmates were actually taking care of the area they had been given. Well, at the very least, they will keep it habitable. Looking up at the building to his left, James saw an external staircase that led to the roof. It was a start, he thought, and proceeded to the stairs. The man took them two at a time, and he was almost to the top when he heard muffled voices from inside the building. There was a window on the level above him, so James quickly headed up and looked through the glass. It was incredibly dirty, but James was able to see some of what was happening in the room on the other side of the window. But what the man saw was the last person he ever wanted to see again. James gritted his teeth as he watched a familiar figure in a tattered purple suit stomped towards someone on the other side of the room, his shaggy green hair bouncing up and down as he did so. It was the clown prince of crime himself, the Joker. God, James could not stand the clown. And to make matters worse, Harley Quinn was also there, assisting her put-in, as she would call Joker. It was clear to everyone but Quinn how one-sided the love between her and Joker was. James shook his head at the thought. He actually felt bad for the jester, but also could not help but find her annoying. Even when she was not around the Joker, Quinn was just unbearable most of the time. Ignoring Harley, James looked back to the Joker and noticed how different the clown seemed. Of course, he had that stupid smile plastered on his face, but it did not quite reach his eyes like usual. And the way he moved, the way he paced about the room as if he was nervous, it was all so strange. The Joker looked desperate. What was he of all people worried about? Then, without warning, the Joker kicked the person he was speaking to, and they went flying out a window. James spun around and looked in the direction where the mysterious figure was falling, and he was able to catch a glance of who the Joker had attacked. Tied to a wheelchair for some unknown reason, but there was no mistake. He was definitely Batman. Location: Arkham City. Old GCPD building. Time: 11:56 p.m. After securing a blood sample from Ra's al Ghul, Batman and James found the one person who would be able to make a cure for the Caped Crusader's illness. James learned from Batman that the Joker has been suffering since the incident at Arkham Asylum a year ago. Titan, which was supposedly a superior formula to the venom Bane used, was slowly killing the clown from the inside. When James had seen the Joker before at the mill, he had already performed a blood transfusion with Batman, and now the vigilante carried the same disease as his arch enemy. It was a dirty move, but James had to admit it was effective. If anyone had the knowledge to develop a cure, it was Dr. Victor Freeze, aka Mr. Freeze. The doctor had sent them on a quest to get a sample of blood from Ra's, which has the restorative elements needed to complete the antidote. And now with that in hand, everything should be in order. Walking into Freeze's lab, James immediately felt the cold temperature of the room. He was aware that Mr. Freeze needed to be in an extremely cold environment to survive, but this was ridiculous. Glancing over at James, Batman could clearly see that the man was not a fan of the cold, and he even suggested that James wait outside instead. But the mutant was stubborn and refused to admit he was uncomfortable. He insisted that he would stay in case things took a turn for the worse. After all, they had a very rocky truce with Freeze, and he was still a criminal. The duo needed to be ready for anything. Once he had the sample in hand, Mr. Freeze went right to work on the cure. The process went smoothly, with the doctor tinkering with devices James did not even know the name of. But soon enough, Freeze had 2 vials that contained a bright blue liquid inside, and the doctor presented one of the vials to Batman and James while he placed the other one in a safe. He then asked how Batman was feeling, observing how the vigilante looked unwell. The question should have been innocent, but Mr. Freeze's tone was almost mocking in a way. If he was well enough, Batman would have easily detected that. Fortunately, James was there, and he noticed. The mutant stepped closer to Freeze and demanded that the doctor give him the cure. But Freeze said he could not do that and crushed the vial in his hand before James could even act. James snarled at Mr. Freeze and even held up his fists as if he was about to summon his claws. But Batman quickly grabbed his partner and pulled him back just as Mr. Freeze aimed his ice gun at James. The doctor fired his weapon and the ice ended up hitting the safe where the last vial of the antidote was in. Batman urged Freeze to stop, but the doctor was not having any of it. Either the caped crusader finds his wife Nora, who was kidnapped by the Joker, or Freeze will let him die. James sighed and shook his head. He just had to jinx it. Location: Arkham City. Wonder Tower Command Center. Time: 1:22 a.m. James grinned and cracked his knuckles in anticipation as the door to the glass cage before him opened, and now, without any protection, Hugo Strange stood unfazed and claimed he had saved Gotham. Stepping closer to the professor, James prepared to deliver a punch straight to the self-proclaimed savior of Gotham. But surprisingly, Batman beat him to it. It seems that the vigilante was just as angry about Strange's antics as James was. Batman approached Hugo and delivered a quick headbutt, followed by a kick to the professor's chest. Strange went flying to the other side of the room. With Strange out of the way, Batman placed 2 fingers to the side of his head and spoke to an unseen ally using an earpiece in his cowl. Oracle, he called them. James remembered hearing the caped crusader speaking into the air during their time together at Arkham Asylum, but he had no idea who was on the other side of the comlink. As long as they were there to help, James did not care about their identity too much. That was something he could think about at another time. Right now, Strange was the duo's main priority, and the professor was shouting at them, claiming that they ruined everything. Batman grabbed the back of the collar of Hugo's coat and shoved him into the huge window that overlooked the city. The vigilante yelled at the professor, telling Hugo to look at the damage he has caused. But Strange did not see the carnage as a bad thing. He thought it was glorious. Batman shoved the beaten professor to the floor and stormed over the large computer placed in the center of the room. A screen above it had Protocol 10 deactivated in bold blue letters on it. James let out a breath of relief, glad that the protocol had been stopped. While taking down the inmates in Arkham City does sound like a noble goal, the way Hugo wanted to go about it was wrong. Standing from the floor, Strange started rambling about how this was just the beginning. He then stated that he has achieved what Batman could never do, and that Gotham would forever remember his name. Hugo. Just as the professor was about to say Strange, a sword pierced through Hugo's chest, and he looked down to see the end of the blade sticking out of his body. A red spot could be seen forming on his coat, and it was gradually bigger as blood poured from Strange's wound. The sword was pulled out soon afterwards, and the professor fell to his knees before falling on his side, barely hanging on to life. The professor looked up, and there stood none other than Ra's al Ghul, who casually placed his sword back on his belt and stated that Strange has outlived his usefulness. If only the leader of the League of Assassins knew about Protocol 11. Location: Arkham City, Monarch Theater. Time: 2:07 a.m. In his arms, Batman watched as the light in Talia's eyes slowly faded. Talia al Ghul, the daughter of Ra's, had succeeded in retrieving the cure that Harley Quinn had stolen and was about to give it to Batman. But unfortunately, she was deceived. The woman believed she had killed the Joker and ended his reign of terror. Turns out it was an imposter. While she was distracted, the real clown prince of crime appeared and shot Talia in her back. With her last breath, Talia told Batman that she was sorry. The woman looked as though she wanted to say something else, but death took her before she could. As he watched Batman briefly grieve over Talia's death, James just stood there, frozen. It was too much. James stared at the woman's body, but he did not see Talia lying on the ground. Bright red hair cascaded down the woman's shoulders, and her blue eyes stared back at James, dull and lifeless. Oh, how he missed her. Now Batman has lost someone dear to him. They now shared the same pain. And to make matters worse, the duo failed to notice that the fake Joker had grabbed the antidote, and his body began to twist and grow. Soon, the imposter's true identity was revealed to be Clayface, a superhuman who had the ability to change his form into any shape or form he wished. Clayface stood before Batman, who finally managed to let go of Talia, and the superhuman made his hand into a hammer before throwing it down at his enemy. Batman jumped out of the way and mentally prepared himself for the incoming battle. It would have been difficult for anyone else, especially after losing a loved one. But Batman knew he needed to focus on the task at hand, not just for his sake, but for the sake of Gotham. Location, Arkham City, Monarch Theater. Time, 2:55 a.m. Batman looked down at the vial in his hands, which was now half full since the vigilante had ingested some of it for himself. He was finally cured of the Titan disease. That only left Joker, and the clown suddenly attacked Batman in order to retrieve the cure. But in their scuffle, the caped crusader dropped the cure in the process, the vial's contents spilling onto the floor in a blue puddle. In a desperate attempt to save himself, Joker scrambled to the floor and tried to scoop up the blue liquid with his hands, but it was futile, and the clown knew it. He looked up at Batman and asked if the vigilante was happy to see him die. Instead of Batman, James was the one who answered Joker's question, and he even laughed at the clown. It was not that Joker's death was amusing to him, but James had to laugh at the irony of it all. "He would have saved you," James managed to say through his laughter, and it was true. Batman would have very well given Joker the antidote willingly, but the clown acted impulsively. Now he was going to suffer the consequences, which unfortunately meant death to the clown prince of crime. Soon after James said that, the Joker also fell to the ground, and all that could be heard was his stupid laughter echoing throughout the theater. He laughed until his very last breath, and even in death, the clown kept a smile on his face. Oh, the irony. And that is going to be it for What If Wolverine Was in the Arkhamverse. What did you guys think of this What If crossover video, and would you guys like to see a part 2? I do know that a lot of people really want to see part 2, so I have a feeling that you guys are going to say yes. But that being said, let me know in the comments down below what you guys think of it. There's so many more videos that I have planned that I will be doing during the holiday season, because things are just kind of getting crazier from here, and I'm just getting really excited. We have so many brand new episodes, and we got a brand new channel coming along the way, so I'm very excited to finally, be able to dive into that and really get into that mindset of, creating even more content for your enjoyment. It's just always fun to be able to read those comments, and especially around the holiday season. So that being said, thank you guys so very much for tuning in today's video, and don't forget to always be on the lookout for Multiverse Monday, because those are the times where you guys can vote. The next one that actually won in a landslide victory was What If Every Villain Was in Spider-Man No Way Home. And so, it does, make you wonder, could any of the other other ones that didn't really get voted become a video? Absolutely. Like, there's no questions asked. Like, any video is possible, and I'm just very excited. But that being said, I will see you in the next fan fiction. Take care, and have a wonderful day. Peace out.